roll call, please.
Karen Kahn, Bruce Miller,
Here.
John Clark,
Here.
Patricia Griffin,
Here.
Dolores Johnson, Kirk Martin,
Here.
Scott Tracy.
Here. Good. I have one request to change the agenda to move item 12 after item 9. And do I have any other changes to the agenda?
That's the only change I request.
All right. Brings us to public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Any member of the public may address the commission on an item that is not scheduled before them on that day. Do we have any public comment on non-agenda items? Seeing none, we will move forward to notices that on Wednesday, September 9th at 4 p.m., the Airport Commission Secretary duly posted this agenda on the bulletin board of Airport Administration, and that the lease review subcommittee met on Thursday, September 10th at 11 a.m. in the Airport Administration Building. And that moves us along to the consent calendar. Any motion to move an item from the consent calendar? The items are the minutes, the lease amendment with Nareto, Gandolfo, DBA Nargan Fire and Safety, lease agreement Pearson Company Construction, Inc., and the September 2009 Property Management Report. I have a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The consent calendar carries. And that brings us to our liaison reports. It looks like we have our Goleta liaison, Councilmember Easton. Welcome this evening.
Thank you very much. I don't have a great deal to report, but you're probably going to be reading in the next month about the possibility of a new city hall for the city of Goleta, which will be in the, maybe, I should be tentative about that, in the Cabrillo Business Park, just outside the approach zone. Now, I want to be clear about this. That's a line on paper, but it's a line we are expecting you to fulfill.
Can you get the window to watch the airplanes go by?
Some people, I don't know what council members are going to get. Judging by what I have now, is no window. But we'll see. There may be more bennies for council members. But the other thing that did occur to me, that I'm here as liaison, but that means I'm available for questions. And when I ran for office, one of the things that fascinated me was that nobody wants to hear from candidates. They just want to throw questions at them. But I am available for questions, and if you have anything on your mind about Goleta and its relationship with the airport, if I can't answer it, Karen can, because she's in charge, but I would be very happy to entertain whatever you have on your mind.
Did you all consider the hangar that we have? Yeah. As a possible,
in a word, no.
a wise
there
decision.
seemed to be a certain impetus for locating our city hall on Goleta land, and not the city,
imagine.
Santa Barbara's land. Well, we have a DRB, and which I used to serve on, and it's one of the things I'd love to talk to them, to the Santa Barbara DRB, about how it looks kind of funny to have Spanish colonial out here in Goleta, even though it's Santa Barbara land. So can we establish a working relationship here? And maybe I should start that discussion with Karen and
Spanish colonial agricultural or something.
I don't believe they built much agricultural.
A few sheds, maybe.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that offer, and I'm sure in the future we will have more questions for you. Okay, Commission Matters, item 8, that we received an oral report on the lease review subcommittee meeting held on Thursday, September 10th. Who is providing that report?
Got me. We were there.
Well.
Did I take notes?
I thought you were giving the Okay.
Were you there?
I was there,
Nobody
too.
advised me of that, so let's see.
Well-
We differ off the ladder.
I think the main topic of the lease review commission, lease review subcommittee was that of the proposed airline rates and charges, and that is item 11, which we will be discussing. So that was the primary item discussed.
Good memory.
Okay. I was there. Okay. And then the rest was just kind of a standard update on current lease activities and some of those efforts there. Okay, and that brings us to administrative, well, it isn't, I guess it's not really administrative. Item 9, amendments to the T-hanger rules and regulations, and also the T-hanger waiting list policy and procedures. That's we're really looking at 2 different items here, and I think I'd like to make a motion that we divide this motion into 2 items, one being the T-hanger rules and regulations, and the second item being the T-hanger waiting list policy and procedure.
I would
That's
second
second.
that. I would second that.
Any opposition to dividing the motion? Okay. Item 9, we'll take the first item there, which is that the Commission authorize and approve the airport director to execute amendments to the T-hanger rules and regulations. And included is, I believe, Appendix A, which has the
Exhibit A.
specific
Mr. Chair.
changes to the regulations.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we have a little presentation.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm ready. The, I'll start with the rules and regulations, but in the presentation, it also talks about the waiting list policy. So if you'll forgive me, I didn't realize we had 2 motions at the beginning. As you know, that the rules and regulations, the whole package, the whole information for our 24 T-hangers that we constructed, we did put together rules and regulations and also a waiting list policy and also a permit or a license agreement for those T-hangers. And we did that prior to 2006. Airport staff put that together, gathered information from other airports and also from experience here on our own airport. We circulated those. We had public meetings. We had pilot review, and then they went to Airport Commission and were ultimately adopted by resolution by City Council in June of 2006. In the resolution, it did state that it was anticipated that from time to time those rules and regulations and possibly the waiting list would need to be amended, and that authority was granted to Airport Commission. We went forward with the lottery in November 2006. It was held at an Airport Commission meeting. We selected 24 names for the initial T-hanger occupants and then 25 for the waiting list. We currently have less than 10 names on that waiting list, and that kicks us into following the rules that we currently have on the waiting list policy. In your packet and also published with the agenda is a complete copy of the rules and regulations, and we highlighted where changes were to be made to make that easier just to spot. There's not real significant changes, but we did make some adjustments to the aircraft owner, qualified aircraft owner, the airworthiness of the aircraft. We also allow 1 6 cubic foot refrigerator. We added a pilot's lounge in one of the end units, and that is available for use. We did restrict barbecue activity. It's not that it can't be done, but it needs to have prior permission, so we'll know what's going on the ramp. And then we also clarified extension cord use, since that was a fire department concern. On the waiting list policies, we did some amendments that primarily just cleaned up the language about the initial lottery. We took that language out, or we're proposing to take that language out. We had a meeting on August 19th with the General Aviation Subcommittee meeting, and we went over the changes in the rules and regulations and the waiting list policy. And we also discussed the possibility of changing the waiting list from the current lottery position to a general waiting list concept. That was recommended by Commissioner Miller. Some of the comments that we have regarding the lottery process as far as the airport, it's a fair and transparent process. Selection obviously is very public when we do it at Airport Commission, and it provides an equal chance. It also protects the city from perceptions of favoritism, because we know with some FBOs you can be on a list, but if you lose your airplane, you lose your hangar. If you don't buy fuel, you might not have a hangar. So there are different ways of doing that, and with the city, we wanted to make sure that there was no reference whatsoever to favoritism. So after a discussion, we had Commissioner Khan, Commissioner Clark, and also Commissioner Johnson attend the subcommittee meeting. And after discussion, they approved the proposed amendments to the rules and regulations and the waiting list policies, and recommended that we retain the current lottery selection method for the T-hanger waiting list. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Let me ask at this time if we have public comment on the T-hanger rules and regulations, specifically on the T-hanger rules and regulations.
Oh, no, just on the waiting.
Okay, thank you. No public comment on the 9, we'll call that 9A, the T-hanger rules and regulations that we approve and authorize these amendments to the rules and regulations. Do we have any discussion?
I have a question. On page 2 of 9, the wording was changed for the permitted airworthiness. And in the change, it's required condition inspection conducted by an FAA certified inspection station. I was curious why that was changed from a certified inspector certified by the FAA, because that seems like it would place an extra burden on the person, because some people may have mechanics that can sign off their annual.
I think Jeff did this. I don't know.
Can we go back and check on that?
Sure. Yeah, my understanding has always been that it simply requires an A&P with an inspection authorization to declare an aircraft
Yeah, I think
airworthy
the
and
FARs
not-
would.
Yeah. And better than that, those of us with experimental aircraft can do it ourselves legally. So,
True.
We'll check.
And I had one other question. The pilot lounge use. This is new to me. I don't know where it's located or how the keys are obtained. Maybe you could describe that.
We do have and are ready to distribute keys to that end unit to all the occupants of the current T-hangers. And it has a desk, a computer, a table, some chairs, and I can't remember which one it's on. I think it's a center unit at the west end. So
That
we will
seems like a
be
nice
distributing keys.
But no barbecue.
is there a,
Unless you get prior permission.
is there a 6 cubic foot refrigerator in there?
No, unfortunately, there isn't.
Some have full-size or more than 2 full-size refrigerators
And freezers.
and freezers.
Okay. Well, seeing, I think, at least one substantive question, I would make a motion that we table this to get a resolution on that question.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we will table for further investigation 9A, the amendment to the T-hanger rules and regulations. And that brings us to the item that we'll call 9B, that the Commission approve and authorize the Director to amend the T-hanger waiting list policy and procedures shown in Exhibit B and also overviewed in the presentation. And I have 2 speaker slips on this item. I think I got Carl Hopkins first. So, Mr. Carl Hopkins.
My name's Carl Hopkins. My comments are that I thought the lottery for the initial go-round was an excellent idea because you needed some way to allocate a scarce resource amongst the large number of people who are interested. But it seems to me that going forward, a publicly available list of people interested on a first-come, first-served basis is an extremely open, transparent, fair, and fairer to the individuals rather than waiting and waiting and waiting and then hoping that they win the lottery. If you put your name on a list and you're number 12 on the list, you have some idea as you move along, and presumably you can either go online or call and say, am I still 12 or am I now number 1? And as opposed to waiting some unknown period of time and then have a lottery and, gee, you could be on that list for 20 years and just never luck out to have your name drawn. Again, it seems to me a fairer way would be a list, and I think that as long as the process is an open and public one, you'd be pretty hard pressed to get some type of favoritism link in there. It's first come, first served, period. I believe you have an annual fee to stay on the list, which would discourage people from just randomly putting the name on the list whether they're interested or not. So I would suggest that you go to a open public waiting list.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. And also Mr. Paul Trent.
Good evening. As some of you know, I previously requested to the Commission a year or two ago that the 4 people who were simply out of luck on the first drawing, if you remember, there were 52 people. There were 24 that got hangers, and I thought there were 24 on the list, so I see 25 on there. And there were 24 on the waiting list. There were 4 that were SOL, which stands for simply out of luck. In my mind, there's no reason why there should be a limit on how many are on the waiting list. That's foolish. If people come and go through this procedure, no matter where they come in, they should be on the waiting list. So I think it's ridiculous to say we're only put so many on the waiting list. I have no understanding of that. And secondly, what I requested before, excuse me, I've got something going. What I requested before was that the 4 people who were on the first lottery, who were simply out of luck, would be favored and be allowed to add on to the list in the same order in which they were on that lottery, rather than going through an entire new lottery to even get on a waiting list. And I believe that's fair and open. I don't see what's wrong with it. I was 52, by the way, so I'm not getting ahead of anybody, okay? But in my opinion, that's fair, open, straightforward, and I think that would be a reasonable thing to do. And then if you have another lottery, however many there are, they should be all on the waiting list. That's my opinion. And my other question, and I'm not sure this is a problem, but when you had the first lottery, are you certain that in each case it was only for one airplane, or were there multiple owners on the lottery who, so that one airplane had 3 or 4 people drawing for hangers? Because if you did, that's wrong. And I don't know that that's what happened. But if it is, that's wrong, and it shouldn't have happened. So I bring that up, too. And in any new drawing, you should be certain that it's for an airplane, not for one of 3 or 4 owners for the same plane. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trent. Do we have any other public comment? All right. We have discussion.
We can comment on what they, because it wasn't at the beginning of the meeting.
Item for action or discussion.
There's some good points. Maybe we could address that. In the initial lottery, the people were not doubling up, and they were assigned to an N number of an aircraft, right?
Every person that was in the drawing or in the lottery were owners of an aircraft.
And not the same aircraft, just for clarification.
One aircraft.
Right.
One name. That doesn't. What did happen, however, was that there were people with 2 airplanes who submitted separate applications, and their names were listed twice, but they had two separate aircraft, and those that did happen.
Well, I would say I think that at this point the only way to fairly conduct the process is to have this next lottery, because that's what was published as how this was going to happen. But I would again say that I think that going forward, I think this lottery should be to take all names and put them on the waiting list, and then maintain a publicly open waiting list at as first come, first serve. I think that's pretty consistent with virtually every other airport I've ever seen. This is the first lottery for an ongoing positions that I'm aware of. I understand that the Harbor Commission had, or the Harbor had indicated the difficulties in maintaining such a list. I think there would be I have to imagine that there's still considerable difficulty in maintaining a lottery process, because you would have to be getting questions, when's the lottery? I think the only fair way to conduct a lottery is to advertise that, which introduces expenses and effort just to advertise such a thing so that it would be fair. Long gone are the days that there's like a newspaper that you can simply publish such a thing in to do an adequate job of notifying the public. I think it takes far more outreach than simply one ad in one newspaper.
I think the administrative part is really not an issue. I think if Commission wants to consider switching to a open waiting list for whatever reasons, then I think that should be based on that. Administratively, it doesn't take any more time. In fact, it probably takes less time than it would to manage an open waiting list. I do have experience with that from having worked at the Harbor. We just recently spoke with the Harbor Master and his staff, and they're going to a lottery system because of the unwieldiness of dealing with an open list. They have people on that list that have been on there since the 1970s. So it doesn't make you move through any faster. But if you want to make that decision, I would make it based on every other reasons that you want to do it. I don't think administratively that it matters one way or the other.
Okay. Well, thank you. So then we should focus on the fairness and transparency aspect of it.
Also, the website is a sufficient way to advertise the lottery, and it is a one source that all would be directed to. So as far as cost issues there, that would be a non-issue as well. Mm-hmm. I am proud of the fact that things are done with decorum and correct, that there is no favoritism and that sort of thing here. I believe the lottery, in my opinion, is the most favorable process, because there is never a question, ever. In my opinion, if you have a list, there will always be a question. Who was on that list? Why were they on that list? How did they move on that list? And anytime there is a question, and in today's world, anyone that decides to pick up a question and put it in the breeze, that then becomes fact, as opposed to searching it out and finding the true answer. I believe that the lottery is the best process because there is never a question. No matter what source, everyone is quite aware of the process, and it is fair, transparent, and that would be what I would support.
So I guess my question would be, I know that the subcommittee took this up at length, and I should have set in, with regard to other communities that have dealt with the same issue, what has the experience been as far as taking out our harbor, which has been nothing but problematic? What are other airports doing to deal with this same issue, and how? Why?
You did the research.
Mm-hmm. In our research, we did speak with, as an example, Long Beach Airport was one of the airports that we spoke with, and this goes back a couple of years. They did have a waiting list, and they did construct some T hangers and have T hangers on the field. Their staff experience was the same as was just reported. I mean, it's very difficult. Who is first? How do you track who's first and stays on the list that way? It does require that once you have a list, then you've got to verify that everybody is still interested. They just felt that there was a lot of, I don't want to say suspect, it just was unwieldy. They wished that they could go to a lottery. They didn't have that system, but the staff there did recommend that we do that. So, if we want to have a lottery and have anybody who submits the application and it's deemed complete and not limit it to 25 people, limit it to however many people turn in applications, that's also, as Mr. Trent mentioned, that's certainly a concept that would work. But as Karen said, working with the lottery list is very simple, and we've done that during this past year. We have gone through, as you know, 15 different turnovers with applicants, but we have everything's filled out, it's there, it's ready to go. So it is not difficult to work with the lottery list.
So there's an annual fee for them to stay on this list?
In the rules and regulations, yes, it's $50.
In effect, the lottery is simply constructing the list. You're still maintaining the list.
Mm-hmm.
And a list is a list, whether people got on it first come, first serve, or by way of a lottery. So I'm still not clear why maintaining that list is any different one way or the other once you've created the list and you publish the list. I mean, that's no different. Names didn't mysteriously move around it when it was created by a lottery. Why would that be any different? I mean, if you have a publicly published list, why is it different? How the names, what changes about that list depending on if the names got on there by people applying or by way of a lottery? People still fill out an application, they get added to a list, versus they fill out an application, they get randomly placed on the list. But you're still maintaining the list. I guess I still don't understand why there's more of a burden maintaining a list that way. Is it because of the sheer number on the list? If you were to allow anybody on the list?
Well, I think one way, charging a fee to maintain the list, an annual fee, is one way to help keep it down. I think that's where the harbor started getting into trouble. It was originally free, and they had people on there who died and stayed on there.
Sure.
And there was no reason to go through and call the list until they had a slip come up, which didn't happen very often. So I think if you had an open list, if you charged a fee to maintain it, then at least you have a response from the people on the list once a year.
Sure.
To verify their address, that they still have an airplane. Say, we require the people on the list to have an airplane. So when you're offered, when you sign on the list, you have to have an airplane. At the harbor, you don't have to have a boat. And in fact, you get 90 days or so to get a boat. In our case, you have to have something to put into the hangar. So we're a little stricter in that regard. But I think if you did go to an open list, definitely charging an annual fee would at least have people that were interested, truly interested in being on the list.
So it sounds to me that really the essence of the question is, to get on the list, do we have a lottery or just let people get on it first come, first serve? Once they're on the list, maintaining the list is really no different in either case, assuming that you still have the annual renewals and the fees, which would presumably keep the list
I don't
shorter.
think the administrative part is the issue, and particularly if you charge a fee to, annual fee to stay on it. So again, I would make your decision based on fairness, whatever other reasons you want to make. I just think administratively, it's not that big a deal.
Okay. So yeah, I don't think we had a question as to whether or not we were going to change the list fee structure. That I believe I wasn't thinking that that was a question as to whether or not we would have that fee. So we would presume that in either case, we would have that fee structure in place for renewing a position on the list, which would presumably keep the list in the dozens, probably not the hundreds. Okay, so the issue really boils down to then a lottery to get on the list presumably after we create the list at this point.
And so I have a question. So we do the lottery, or we open up the list, and so is it the person that calls on the phone that's first in line? Is it the person that comes in the door that's first in line? Is it the person that talks to her or talks to me? It would be me because I'm the boss.
No, they have to submit an application. That would.
As I said, I think the only way to proceed at this point is to have this lottery to create the list. Going forward, I don't think you're going to have even two people on any one day trying to get you an application. I would say going forward, having a list, first come, first serve. Whoever gets a completed application to the front desk, in what order, would seem to be satisfactory. I can't imagine that there's that many race conditions between two individuals.
I'd just like to comment, that's a very valid issue, and we can't guess whether there will be two people on the same day at the same time from different sources or not. The possibility that exists, it's very real, and so it does cause question. And so that, once again, brings me back to the point that there is a very clear, transparent process, and then there is one that isn't as clear and transparent for multiple reasons. And so consequently, this is a very valid point. I'm glad you brought the question up.
May I make one other comment?
Yes, Mr. Trent. The microphone, please.
It seems to me
Say
that
your name, Paul. Say
your
your name.
concern about a clear process is, of course, fair, but it also isn't fair in other ways. In other words, if somebody's been out at this airport for 20 years taking an airplane and gets themselves and has to wait for a lottery to get on a list, okay, and some guy waltzes in the same door who hasn't been supporting this airport, hasn't been buying fuel here, hasn't been keeping this airport going, why is it fair for this person who's just shown up today to have the same chance of getting a hanger as somebody who's been here for years? So while I appreciate that this makes things safe and good for the commission and the airport, that this is fair, frankly, I think the other system's more fair to the users of the hangars. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is the system being proposed, does it have a time frame of when it would time out and you would re-lottery?
Yes.
Right. When the list gets down to a certain number, then we do a lottery.
And those 10 people would remain
They're at the top
on the
of the
list?
list.
They're at the top of the list
And
for
we
the
just
new group.
fill in the bottom of the list.
So how often would that happen? Is it based just on number, or would you also consider a calendar time frame where people might have the chance to get more opportunity to get on that list?
Well, originally we had designed it to, when you got to 10, whether it was in 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years, is to do another lottery. Now, if you wanted to do a lottery more often, just to fill the bottom of the list, we could do that too. But everybody from the previous lottery who's still remaining on the list would just move up to the top, if I said that right.
Yeah.
So another option would be to continue with the lotteries, but allow all applicants' positions on the list.
Yes, say that
So
again.
that
To have more than 25 positions.
all
Unlimited.
applicants to the
Right.
lottery
Right,
could
right.
have a position, which
Remove the 25 number
the cap on that,
limitation cap, right.
which would at least address the concerns of individuals not even getting in the lottery. It would potentially make the list longer. But at this point, that may not be that much of a risk. We really don't know what sort of applicant potential there might be out there. So at this point, do I have a motion to send this back for further consideration? Or let me ask also, how many, we have just 10 names. We have 10 names on the list. And in the lease report I saw, we had 3 openings, but I believe those are actually in contract.
And offers have been extended
Okay.
for those 3.
So we're not in any imminent danger of depleting the waiting list in the next couple months? Is that?
Probably not. I mean, unless the 3 declined to take the hangar. But,
Then we go the next.
I mean,
3.
then we go the next 3. So, I mean, within a couple months, I think we'll be fine.
Mhm.
I would suggest that we table it for the moment and perhaps bring it before the entire commission, since we're missing 2 players at the moment. And I would feel better if this thing, because it does have some weight that everybody was involved.
Okay, we have a motion, I guess, to carry it to the next meeting, the next full meeting. And will the GA subcommittee be taking this under further consideration or discussion, or?
I think they have spoken, but I can only speak for one of the members myself.
Right, okay.
And the other 2 aren't here. That's part of the problem.
Okay, so it sounds like a motion then to carry this forward to the next full meeting.
I think it's, yes.
And I would second that.
In
It's
favor?
a table to a full committee.
Full commission.
Commission.
Full committee.
That could be
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, well, thank you all for your input and participation. This item is carried forward. And that brings us to number 12, the overview of fiscal year 2008-2009. Thank you, Mr. Tracy, for your patience.
Did you find it?
It's a shortcut.
Sort of anticlimactic after that. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought as we concluded the last fiscal year, to kind of take a, pardon? To take a look back and see what we accomplished. Sometimes we move forward and trying to get things completed, and we never really realize what we accomplished or where we are in kind of the scheme of the world. This is our mission statement that as the airport of choice in the Tri-Counties, that will be self-sustaining, exceed expectations for safety and quality service, and meet the air transportation and economic development needs of our customers and partners. Some of our milestone projects that were very significant this last year was the airline terminal project. We awarded bids, very favorable bids, and financing was secured, very favorable financing, and we have begun construction, which is, if anybody has used the terminal in the last few months, they had to notice. The rental car maintenance facility is nearly completed. We secured financing. The city is being our bank, so to speak. And we are paying our loan amount to them. As I said, construction's almost completed, and it will be a LEED certified or a LEED rated facility. And our goal is silver, but I'm told we're very close to gold. So if we do, that'll be quite remarkable. Whoops. Go back. There you are. Airport Commission also made some definite contributions to what's been happening at the airport this past year. You served on a review committee to look at the proposals for the self-serve fuel facility, which the company, MAG Aviation, has submitted their development application to the city, and that's moving forward. GA landing fee. You've met and given input on that, and then tonight that's an item on tonight's agenda. In air service and ground transportation, you approved an air service development and incentive program to give some relief and incentive to airlines for new service into our community. You also reviewed and deliberated on our fiscal year 2010 operating budget and capital program for the next 5 years. In property management, reviewed 32 leases and established our commercial industrial rates for the fiscal year. Commission matters, we adopted is probably not the right word, began to include a City of Goleta liaison with Councilmember Ed Easton, and recognize Bill Gilbert for his service on commission for 2001 to 2009. In the industry, now this is on a calendar year, and as we progress through this and get more down to Santa Barbara, it will be on a fiscal year, so kind of keep that in mind. Nationally, avgas sales were down 20% in Santa Barbara in 2008 calendar year over 2007, and in Santa Barbara they were down 37%. Flight activity with general aviation was down 18% nationwide, and in Santa Barbara down 10%. Passengers in commercial air service was down about a little over 3% nationwide, and in Santa Barbara we were actually up slightly for the calendar year of 2008. We did take a bigger hit on airline departures as they kind of retrenched, trying to save costs. Throughout the United States, the airlines had issues with rising fuel costs, the declining economy, cost-cutting measures. As you know, they cut flights out of many communities, including our own, and cut employees, started charging for bags, and so their world changed, which made our world change for those of us that use airline service. In terms of Santa Barbara statistics for fiscal year 2009, now we're going to the fiscal year. Our passengers on a fiscal year basis were down 8%. Our total operations, this is both commercial as well as general aviation, were down 17%. Our based aircraft actually went up slightly, but the total value went down. So I guess we got rid of, or some of the expensive airplanes maybe left the field, I don't know. Santa Barbara avgas sales went down almost 32% in 2009 over 2008, and Jet A down 9.2%.
Financial results. Despite the weak economy, we did meet our budget last year by 1.8% over budget. This graph gives you an idea of our revenues by line item. The next chart shows 4 main categories: commercial industrial, commercial aviation, the terminal, which includes parking, rent-a-cars, concessions, and then non-commercial aviation, which is the general aviation per se. Going back to 2004, you can see that commercial industrial is pretty much holding its own. It is a limited commodity at this point. Commercial aviation has increased since 2004, but certainly the one that shows the biggest change is in the terminal, where we've really worked with the airlines, with the rent-a-cars and parking to generate additional revenue. Non-commercial aviation, as you can see, is pretty much flat. Expenses, we held the line on our expenses last year at $11.8 million and came in under budget. I believe it was about 8% under budget for 2009. The next chart, I believe, gives you, once again, a historical perspective on expenses. Salaries and benefits, supplies, which also includes the contract that we have for ARF and also the contract with Public Works for the 2 engineers. Allocated costs are those that downtown charges us for other services, human resources, the city administrator, information systems, that sort of thing. I would point out that in 2004 and 2005, we had 50 employees. 2006 and 2007, we had 53 employees. And in 2008 and 2009, we had 54 employees. So that played a role in the increase for salary and benefits. Preliminary balances for our reserves as of the end of June 30, 2009. You'll notice we are fully funded for the city's required reserves for economic uncertainty, future year budgets, and then capital. And then we have about $2.4 million above policy. These numbers will be finalized once the city's audit is completed. I anticipate that in October, so I'll come back to Commission with the what they say our reserves are. Grants and facility charges, we still do well with our relationship with FAA. Our airport has projects that meet the criteria. We have the 2 engineers on staff, so we're really eager to work on airport improvement program grants. So we received 2 this year that, what's that, $3.67 million. CFC collections, those are on contracts issued by the rent-a-car companies, almost $1 million. That funding, keep in mind, will pay the debt service to the city for the quick turn facility. Passenger facility charge collected is $1.4 million. That's down, but it tracks with domestic and international traffic, which is down, as Karen had pointed out before. The next chart gives you an idea of that relationship we had with FAA for the last 3 or 4 years. You'll notice that we've received almost $12 million in entitlement money based on the emplanements at this airport, but discretionary money of $25 million. That more than totally went for the runway safety area project that we worked on for 20 years. Tracy also has a noise grant there, $665,000. He still has that grant. PFC revenue over the last 5 years, you can tell that 2007 was a good year, and that tracks with our emplanements. And 2009, these are fiscal year numbers. It is down, as you can tell. CFCs, once again, the first year, 2006, recall that we started that program in January, so you have half a year in 2006. But 2 years, it was pretty much neck and neck, and then it does show a decrease for 2009. Managing our assets, Karen mentioned the leases that you reviewed, and you know that Rebecca does her report in June. But we do have 148 agreements that we manage, 4.7 million square feet of land to lease, and 334,000 square feet of building space. Lease revenues this year versus 2008 were up 3.8%. And our building occupancy, even in the depressed times that we have right now, we're still hanging in at about 98%. I mean, it's phenomenal. But we have some very loyal and very, very good tenants. Air service, boy, that's a up and down situation. Airline industry, it's distressed, it's dismal. It has been adversely affected by fuel, and now it's affected by the economy. Nationwide, as well as international traffic, has been impacted. And in the Tri-Counties, you'll recall that San Luis Obispo was really impacted a year ago when I think they lost 25% of their service or thereabouts. This chart gives you an idea of the number of departures, daily departures. Santa Barbara has 38, 12, 5, and 4. We still have the lion's share, or 64%, I believe, of the departures in the Tri-Counties. Terry's very proud of the 6 major airlines that we have, and rightfully so. And we do go to 9 nonstop destinations from Santa Barbara, which is still phenomenal for an airport our size. Seat capacity, I believe that we need to take 2008, put it where 2009 is, and vice versa, because I just said we had 38 departures.
Oh.
So I think I think we got that. Yeah, the right and the left hand. So we are, our seats are down, our departures are down, our load factor is up, and that's a good thing. But we have had changes, as you know, with ExpressJet and with Horizon and American Eagle. Terry works extremely hard. The marketing and community relations program still strives to create awareness that Santa Barbara is the place to fly from, not driving down to LA or to Burbank if you don't have to. The airline industry, she also has a very good relationship and contacts with a variety of airline companies and stays in touch with them, providing them information about Santa Barbara and the uniqueness of the city of Santa Barbara and the Central Coast area. They look to that these days as a reason to add service to a community. Airline cost, we are trying to keep them contained. We don't want to lose airline service, and we have the margin of commercial industrial property which assists us in staying in the black. Uncertain economy, it will eventually turn around. It hasn't yet. Fluctuation of fuel costs, they're down now, but you'll recall they were outrageous last year. Decrease in departures, seat capacity, and then airline rates were maintained at 2008 levels in the fiscal year 2009. Operations.
My turn?
Your turn.
Okay.
Then you can go.
All right.
Do well.
It's a deal. Okay. I believe everybody knows air traffic has been down. It's been down across the country, but we broke it out as it's broken out by the tower, FAA, and you can see the local has been the biggest hit.
You want to do that?
No, that's okay. In total, we're down 18%.
Not sure about military.
Yeah. And noise complaints. It was a good year regarding noise complaints. We had a very low number, 364. That's a 10% reduction over last year. We had about 405. As far as tracking, airline noise complaints went up just a bit over last year because I believe we have an MD-80 departure 3 times a week, and my noise, Mr. Logan assured me that was why. Their last day of service, unfortunately, was Sunday, but so we expect to see that kind of level out again. Business jets have stayed about the same. And again, it ends up, just for trivia purposes, it's about 1 complaint for every 285 operations. Last year, it was 1 complaint for every 304 operations. So we're doing total noise complaints, to give you some perspective. There at the far end is 2009. You can see that it's been significant, and I do want to mention that there were some years where we had a particular individual calling in anywhere between 500 and 1,000 complaints on that one single person. And in conversations with the noise committee, they asked us to please not include those, but just to put a footnote that there was an individual in those. It was 04 and 01 and 02. So just security, omnipresent. I know that's a busy chart. The main thing I wanted to talk about was the very first one, access control alarms. At the beginning of this fiscal year, we implemented a very successful, although it was rough going initially, it's been a very successful program with all of the tenants who are SETA badge holders that come in and out of the gates and doors. We had, I don't have the exact number, around 130,000 odd alarms annually. We implemented a security video to beef up the training, and the bigger stick was a notice of violation program that we worked on the airline station managers with. So administrative citations were issued when people had gotten a warning, and then continued to have what we consider sloppy user errors that cause alarms and drive the workload way up. The bottom line is the number of alarms have dropped 67%. So it's very, very successful, and we're very pleased about it. And the other things you see are also the airfield safety inspections. It's part of our Part 139 program. We do daily airfield inspections. And then if you have any questions about any of them, go ahead and ask. But the main ones would be the sensitive areas and the security identification display ramp inspections, where we're most closely looked at by TSA, in addition to the badging. So it was a busy year, but we're very proud of the notice of violation program and the 67% reduction in the what we can completely unnecessary alarms. Post-11 security new requirements. Many of you are familiar with the fact that we have had to transition from just being able to issue access cards, which were quicker and easier to issue, to actually issuing picture identifications and going to have threat assessment checks on all of the, not only general aviation population, but everybody that has regular unescorted access to the air operations area. So we're having to pick up some of the big utilities that also have that, as well as some FAA people that previously weren't badged. It's been a big work effort for us. We're probably issuing close to 1,000 of these, in addition to the several hundred we already had outstanding of CETA badges. It's a big workload. Projects, thermal image cameras. We had some issues a few years back with unauthorized individuals getting access to the airfield via creeks, going under streets through creeks and getting onto the airfield. The TSA told us we needed to find a way to detect and deter, and the thermal image camera does that. We're just about to turn those on. We're just finishing up a punch list. They're installed, they're up and operating. They're pretty phenomenal to look at. You can we can see people if it's dark or if it's foggy or what have you in these three key areas where we've had problems before, and if they appear, we will get an alarm.
I guess alligators was probably not.
There were many things joked about for sure. Alligators was just one of them. But yeah, unfortunately, we just can't build a fence across a creek, and we've had some kayaker issues, and we've had a couple of loony issues getting up under there. So anyway,
that's a bird.
It's a bird, yeah.
People that were just kind of wandering from one side of the freeway to the other under it. So.
Planning for emergencies after the Gap fire. We participated with the county. The entire department, Karen, attended several meetings also in not only getting the hydromulch going last year and then again this year, but really going through and looking at everything that could be done to prevent flooding. We were getting sandbags ready and pre-staging sandbags. We had tenant briefings. I think several of you attended a couple of those, and they went well. The tenants were very good about doing sandbags, picking them up early, getting them in place. We put words out when bad weather was coming via email, and we just encouraged everybody to follow and we will be doing that again this year, because even though the hydromulch held very well last year, we didn't get a lot of rain. We still have a couple of years of growth we need before we're out of the dark. We also had a security tabletop exercise. We're required to have one every year. We had one last January. All the first responders participate, and I'd say it went well. We had some interesting scenarios that gave people some, perplexed them a bit regarding biohazards. And then finally, we did participate in the Jesus CETA fire response. We had 3 of our staff members, both Terry and both of our planners, Terry Gibson, our marketing person, and both of our planners in the EOC downtown working as PIOs, working in that PIO function, and they spent a lot of hours in there, so we're real proud of them for that. Facility maintenance. We did install a cool roof with very high efficient HVAC units on a large building that is, I guess it's L3 Communications in that building now. It used to be MaryPro. Now they're L3 Communications. It's very green, and we'll be doing more of this, as you'll see as the years go by. I think everybody knows long-term lot number 2 used to be our overflow lot. Now we use it 24 hours a day. It's kind of a big internal project to get all the signage up, get everything remarked, run some new electrical. It went well, and that conversion did go well. We're really happy about that, because we opened it like a week before Thanksgiving, and we didn't have a problem, so we're very pleased. And the only people happier than us about the relocated gift shop are the people that run the gift shop. And a lot of customers. when ExpressJet moved in, we had no choice. We did our best to accommodate them. It worked out, but there was a significant drop in business, about 30%. It's already back up since we've relocated them, and we're real pleased with that. We are continuing the green push everywhere, including the airfield. Some of our projects had LED lights go in on taxiways, so we wanted to just complete the taxiways, and we were able to defer a project with no significant impact to kind of sneak away the money to buy some LED taxiway lights, enough to finish them off. We did go to bid. We will be installing them in-house throughout the year. We had about 375 taxiway lights left to install, and we got 400, so we have a few extras. And the elevated runway guard lights, and for those of you that aren't pilots and don't know, they're on each end of the taxiway where it meets the runway, and they kind of flash like railroad crossings, and they're on all the time. When those were installed, I want to say 3-4 years ago, we just saw the electric bill just spike through the roof, and they are now available in LED. We have purchased them, and we will begin installing them soon, and we expect significant savings from them. And then we had rubber removal off of runway 725, which is a really important thing to do on runways. Okay, this one I'll explain a little bit. Very first one, approval of the airport's portion of the city's municipal separate storm sewer system. Everybody hears a lot about stormwater at the airport. I'll try to be brief. I know it's not a fun subject. We have had one particular stormwater permit project for many years. It's an industrial permit because we are an industrial activity. We have been categorized as such. However, just 2 years ago, the state implemented new law requiring cities to have stormwater plans that deal with sweeping streets, sweeping parking lots. That was not previously required. So we, being a portion of the city, we have a section of that plan where we now have some stormwater issues applying to outside of our industrial area on the north side and other areas over here that previously were not covered under the industrial permit. And it was officially approved in January, and we have already implemented the first portion of that, which involves education, outreach, marking drains that public can get to so that they know that they drain to the ocean, things like that. It's an important program, and it's in full swing. And then we completed the annual stormwater report, which we've been doing every year as our industrial permit requirements. And this is one where we actually do stormwater samples, and we send them in. And anyway, we're doing well. We are looking at anything that's out of balance and going out and trying to find why there's, maybe too much iron or too much this, and trying to address that. IPM, I just mentioned, I want to remind everyone, I know you just got the IPM annual report just about 2 meetings ago, but we did increase the labor efforts and the manual efforts to reduce the number of pesticides that are used, specifically the red ones. And you may recall from that, we had a good year because it was dry, so we didn't have to use as much of the red chemical in the slough to fight the mosquitoes and the West Nile virus. So that was very good. And of course, this will be continuing an ongoing program. And then again, we have continued to support and participate on the Goleta Slough Maintenance Committee. Our planners still meet with them regularly.
Continuing on in the environmental vein, we completed a building assessment of all the buildings on the airport and are looking to the ones that kind of make the most sense to greening them over time and including that in our capital program over the coming years. We're starting with this building kind of as our little test case, and we'll continue to add that to our capital program, as I said, over time. Our lead projects are the rental car maintenance facility, which I said is our goal was LEED Silver, and we'll probably get to LEED Gold, and the airline terminal project, which is the goal is LEED Silver, and we're just preliminarily, we're pretty close to gold on that as well. Reducing consumption was also another of our sustainability goals. We have reduced office paper use and reduced electrical use in our department-occupied buildings. And again, we're switching in terms of power use on the runway to the LEED, reduce electrical use with LEED taxiway lights, LED, excuse me. In our facilities planning and development area, we had over $65 million worth of projects in design and about that same amount in construction during the year. And of course, the terminal takes a good lion's share in both of those areas, as well as the rental car quick turnaround facility. Just a few major projects. We are heading toward the pretty picture on the top with the terminal project. We started the temporary terminal improvements and are dug up the roadways at the terminal and are doing the soil conditioning right now, and in the fall we'll begin the actual new building construction. The rental car quick turnaround facility, this is the photovoltaic panels that are over a parking area, and then the roof of the building is also has photovoltaic panels. They'll provide, we're hoping, more than 75% of the power of the whole facility, and that includes a car wash, which is a pretty heavy electrical user. So this is very exciting, and at your October meeting, I'll schedule it so that we can take a tour over there at the beginning of the meeting. I think you'll be really impressed. And of course, we dedicated the World War II memorial this year. And that concludes our look at fiscal year 2009.
Wow, thank you for that excellent presentation.
And team effort.
Any questions on the presentation? Nope. Okay, that brings us to item 10, the general aviation landing fees, which we have a presentation on.
Very quick, very quick.
A very quick presentation.
The recommendation is that Commission approve and authorize the Director to impose a landing fee for all aircraft used for commercial activity and operators of non-based aircraft or transient aircraft weighing over 10,000 pounds of gross landed weight to assist in the recovery of expenses related to the operation and maintenance of the airfield. The reason for the purpose and the background, we're looking to provide an equitable system to recover costs that we experience for the airfield. In 2009, approximately $3.5 million was allocated and used for airfield costs. We generated $1.1 million from commercial airlines through landing fees, fuel flowage fees from our based customers, and from all general aviation aircraft totaled $130,000 total. The shortfall of $2.7 million is picked up by other revenue sources generated primarily commercial, industrial, or other revenues on the field. In preparation for suggesting a landing fee for GA, we did a survey of 21 airports, and I believe in your packet you had the results of that survey. Numerous airports are assessing a GA landing fee, and almost without exception, each airport establishes a certain exemption by weight by certain aircraft. The average exemption is 10,000 pounds or less. Some had 6,000 pounds, some had 12,500, but if you average it out, it was 10,000 pounds gross landed weight. What we're proposing is that we begin the GA landing fee effective January 1st, that we collect it from transient aircraft, once again, not based aircraft on the field, but transient aircraft that use the airport if that plane weighs more than 10,000 pounds. Also, if there's a based aircraft on the field that's using that plane for revenue purposes or commercial activity, and they don't have a permit or they don't have an agreement with the airport, then we would also charge them a landing fee. We do provide for exemptions. Once again, non-commercial based aircraft are exempt regardless of size. Angel flights, lifeguard, medical emergency, federal, state, and military aircraft we would exempt from the landing fee. The method that we would use to collect would be to have an agreement with the FBOs who see customers day in and day out. They know the aircraft. They would assess the fee, collect it, maintain a report, and then submit that to us on a monthly basis. And for their efforts, they would maintain or retain 10% of the gross for their administrative cost. A public information effort to distribute the information so everyone is aware of it. We would want to, of course, do a flyer information with each of the FBOs and also at Mr. Stratman's facility, provide it to the GA pilot groups, have it available at our visitor center, and then also update the FAA airport facility directory. As an example, I was asked, well, how much do you think you'd generate? Assume that we have 6,000 operations that meet the definition of a 10,000-pound aircraft or 20,000-pound aircraft, and we use the same landed weight or the landing fee that we do for commercial aviation, and that is recommended in this policy. And currently that's $1.98 per 1,000 pounds. So a 20,000-pound plane would pay 39.60 cents per landing. And if we had 6,000 landings, that revenue would be $237,600 on an annual basis. So it is, it's not a touch of money. It is a good revenue line item for us. So at this point, we did meet with General Aviation Subcommittee on a couple of occasions during this past year in March. And at that point, we were asked to do the survey, gather additional information, who would be exempt, how would you collect it, would you have to audit, and certainly any time that you're doing a project like this, you would audit for consistency. And then again, we went back to lease review, not lease review, GA subcommittee, I'm sorry, August 19th, presented the information, and the subcommittee recommended that we go forward with the Airport Commission for approval of a GA landing fee. That concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, I do have one public comment on this item, but let me just make sure I've got this clear. I think it's fairly clear that transient aircraft over 10,000 pounds, except for those excluded, would have this. But this proposal is for all aircraft used for commercial activity as well, including based aircraft. So, for instance, a flight school would be subject, under this wording, a flight school would be subject to this. You made a mention of based commercial aircraft that didn't have permits or something, but I don't see anything that in the proposed policy.
I didn't consider flight schools as commercial activity. I'm thinking of air taxis, charter.
Well, I understand you're thinking that, but the wording
doesn't
clarify that. I mean, that would have a significant impact on commercial activities if we were to approve this as written and you chose to implement it that way.
Okay. That's not the intent, so certainly we can clarify that language, and I would want to do that because flight schools, like I said, I don't consider that commercial.
Yeah. And, well, there certainly are commercial activities by, I think, most definitions as well. There are pilots on the field with commercial licenses that take people for hire in light aircraft, and that would, under this wording, theoretically include those.
Well, right now, they're required to have a permit to do charter and pay a fee. So that part is not new. In fact, right now, under the FBO lease, they pay 3%
of gross,
as opposed to a landing fee, which would probably be less.
Not only is it in the FBO agreements, it's in the minimum standards, and it's also in the city's municipal code. Right. So if you don't do it, then you're really kind of violating the city law. And we do know that there are commercial activities going on, not flight schools, but there are, as you suggested, folks using their aircraft for business purposes to generate revenue for themselves, and that's a commercial activity that we're talking about.
And your expectation would be they would have a permit to do that, and they would be paying a fee.
And they would
through
pay a
some
landing
mechanism.
fee, right, as
But-
opposed to 3% of their gross revenue, yes.
Okay. 'Cause I feel that your proposed policy statement as it's written doesn't really address some of those situations, specifically the flight schools.
I'd certainly exclude flight schools. I mean, as I said before, that was not the intent. Flight schools.
I picked up
would
on
not
that
be.
too. The wording, excuse me, not to interrupt you.
No, go.
But under the proposed policy statement, the wording isn't clear in the way it's written. Either a comma needs to be added or something changed, because the description of non-based aircraft weighing more than 10,000 pounds gross landing weight, including non-scheduled air taxi, charter, and fractional aircraft operations at Santa Barbara Airport, all of those descriptions are commercial activities, but they're being attached to a non-based GA criteria. So it seemed not clear the way the wording was on the policy statement.
Okay, we can certainly clarify it. I'm open to any suggestions that you have, but I mean, we do know that there are charter activities taking place on the field. They don't have permits. They're not paying any fees to the airport, other than fuel flowage if they were to buy fuel here at the airport.
These are the transient ones you're speaking of.
Based, they're based.
Operators.
Sure, okay.
And would you consider inserting flight training aircraft or historic exempt aircraft or other categories?
Historic?
Well, I was going to suggest that there are, from time to time, nonprofit organizations that bring historic aircraft through, and it's very rare anymore because it's such a hard and expensive venture. But I think it's important that we consider allowing them to be exempt from that, so that an official nonprofit organization with displaying historic aircraft could be
Certainly.
exempted, like the Collings Foundation and those that do that, just so people can continue to take advantage of that. Other comments from the commission before I recognize Mr. Hopkins?
Yeah, but they pay that.
I really didn't, I guess I can't support it the way it's worded, because I have a problem with the GA aspect of it. I don't have a problem with attaching a landing fee to a commercial operation, because they're going to turn around and charge their passenger, and they're going to collect that money back. But a GA operation is already being funded through other sources, according to FAA and the government's administration. I wanted to, if I could, read a caption from AOP Pilot magazine. In an article, in this article, it's actually addressing how they're going to fund FAA modernization. But there are a few captions that will reinforce what I'm saying. An FAA reauthorization bill was introduced in the Senate in July, and it would set the course for modernization of the national airspace system and fund the FAA for the next 2 years without the introduction of user fees. And that's what I'm seeing this as, a user fee for GA. There's currently a bill that would raise taxes. This is in the Senate. Oh, excuse me. The House bill would raise taxes from 19.3 cents per gallon to 24.1 cents per gallon of avgas, and from 21.8 cents per gallon to 35.9 cents per gallon for non-commercial jet fuel. And what seems to be the problem is in the revenues generated, the GA fuel revenues are low, but there are other reasons for that. Historically, we've had astronomical fuel prices at our field, and we're in the process of having MAG Aviation start a self-serve system, and hopefully pricing will be appropriate for the market, and I would say you would see that number increase without generating a landing fee for GA.
And most of the folks that would use the MAG aviation fuel are less than 10,000 pounds gross landed weight for their aircraft.
Understand.
Significantly less.
So I wasn't sure how to present this, because as it's written, I wouldn't vote for it. But if we maybe separated it to commercial, I could support that. But I'm not really keen on the supporting GA landing fees. I also felt the landing weight is arbitrary at 10,000 pounds when the FAA and other organizations use 12,500 as a definition for small aircraft. So even that seems like it's kind of an arbitrary number. And as you pointed in the other presentation, we have a reserve now that's pretty healthy, and as the economy recovers, we could expect that will continue to rise. So I'm trying to cover all my bases here, why I'm not totally sold on the proposal as it's written.
Can I say something, Chairman Melanie?
Yes.
Please. We got a semantics thing going here, I'm afraid, too. GA is everything that isn't military or an airline.
Correct.
Ty Warner's Boeing business jet is GA, and so is the guy in a 152. So we've got a real semantics issue. If some guy is flying charters in a citation, that's general aviation. It's general aviation for money, which separates it out. I mean, we tend to, I suffer from it too. We tend to say GA and we think 172. That's not true. It's everything that isn't an airline.
See, I disagree with that because of the rules that would apply to his flight would be a Part 135 or 120.
No, that is the FAA. That's the view. I agree with you. There are a bunch of divisions within it, but general aviation is a bad term, basically. What we're talking about is mostly here, especially with the transient thing, is, well, for instance, the likes of the jet charter, the jet fractionals now are operating Part 91 because the guy riding the airplane owns a piece of the airplane. So you can't say that's a charter company, truly. So there are a bunch of fine lines here, yet when we're landing Falcons, we need to get some of the revenue for the damage they're doing to the airport. That's what this thing was aimed at. We're not aiming at the guy with a GA, as we understand it, airplane.
Maybe what's needed is for the administration to take a lead on this, which they're not there yet, on the subject of user fees.
You mean the U.S. government?
Yeah.
With those two bills?
The
When you said
administration
I
and,
didn't know if you meant
yeah,
us.
I'm sorry. The administration and the FAA.
User fees.
The source of
Sorry,
funding.
Well, I guess if you look at our revenue stream, and we're really lucky to have the commercial industrial property because that does subsidize aviation, and particularly general aviation. If you look at the contribution in dollars to the airport from general aviation, it's pretty small compared to the airline, revenue that's generated, and we've bumped that up over the years to try and equalize our revenue sources so that when one goes down, we're not really in deep trouble. When we convert this side of the airport from some commercial industrial commercial uses to GA and make more GA facilities, we're going to lose some pretty high revenue generating buildings because they're commercial industrial rates and not aviation rates. So at some point, we do have healthy reserves. Part of those required by City Council for economic uncertainties, for emergencies, and so forth. The other that's above policy is for capital improvements to the airport, which we plow back into facilities that benefit general aviation as well as commercial aviation. So, revenue is an issue. We're lucky that we manage it well and we're conservative. But I think for the future, if we're going to, build this side of the airport for GA, we're going to lose some really high-paying industrial tenants, and that money will have, that financial hole will have to come from somewhere. And I'm not saying that we're going to sock it to GA. I'm just saying that we have to bring our revenues up.
Take this opportunity to recognize our public speaker, Mr. Carl Hopkins.
My name's Carl Hopkins. Unfortunately, in August I was on a flying vacation, so I was unable to attend that meeting. Scott, you covered an awful lot of the things that I was going to say. I am always leery of any additional fees, user fees, increased taxes, whatever, but I also recognize that things cost money and have to be paid for somewheres. So, several of my comments are, first of all, as Scott said, the 10,000-pound limit seemed odd. 12,500 as a limit, as Scott, that's a sort of an agreed-upon definition between small and large aircraft, FAA designation, et cetera. I would think it would also make it much easier for everybody collecting the fees to know whether this is a, quote, large airplane at 12,500 or above versus a smaller one. The second was the fee. There's been a lot of discussion as to the commercial versus the non-commercial, non-based heavy aircraft. And I thought I understood it before the discussion started, and now I'm really confused, because if I understand what you're saying is that you are, if I am conducting a commercial operation here at the airport, I'm supposed to have a permit from the city and pay 3% of my gross. But you know there are people not doing that. And do I understand that by implementing this landing fee, you'll get money from those people? Because it seems to me if somehow or other they're avoiding paying the 3%, they're going to somehow or other avoid paying the landing fees. And that we should either go after everybody on a landing fee and drop the 3%, or we should go over after everybody in commercial on the 3% and not have the landing fee.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay?
We're not saying collect both.
Well, but why don't you just collect the 3% and not collect the landing fee?
Because there are people that have legitimate charters, and I mean legitimate by they have a permit with us, that said they would much rather pay a landing fee, it's less expensive, than the 3%. If we collect the 3%, then we have to audit. And of course, nobody wants us to, the city to audit their books. So they would much prefer to pay a landing fee. That's
true. We've heard that repeatedly. Because when we audit, we get into their total gross.
And we'll just have to continue to try and pursue it.
Okay, at least I understand that. Whether or not I agree with it is sort of, I don't know. The other thing was that if I understand, you have the one fee, $1.98 for commercial operations. If I were lucky enough to own a large aircraft and wasn't based here but landed here, I'd be charged the same amount. Now, I agree with what I think Scott was saying is it's one thing to charge the commercial folks either a landing fee or a 3%, whatever works out, but I would be much more opposed to charging non-commercial operations landing here of any fee. But if you do decide to go with a fee, then I would suggest a smaller fee than the commercial, because they, after all, are not the commercial operations. A half of the commercial operation fee or something that was reduced, if not nothing at all. So what I would suggest is if everybody likes, if the commercial operators would rather pay a landing fee than 3%, so be it. I would still change your rules to 12,500 if you have to go somewheres, but I would also suggest that you drop the landing fee for non-commercial operations, period. I think that covers everything that I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins.
Just as clarification on the landing fee, when we do the commercial industrial or airline landing fee, and we look at all the costs for the airfield, including ARF, airfield maintenance, noise abatement, and we segregate those based on, for example, ARF, the number of operations that they do. They're here because of the commercial aviation, but they're called out repeatedly for GA activity as opposed to commercial activity. Historically, there's more GA call-outs. Same thing on maintenance. The main runway and taxiway Alpha are primarily used by commercial industrial. That's the only one they use. Commercial airlines. I keep saying industrial. But most GA folks also like 725. They also have the 2 parallel runways, 15 right and left, and the associated taxiways. The ramp that we have spent several $1 million worth of FAA money and PFC money to repair the ramp for general aviation. The costs for GA exceed the costs for the airlines. So if we were to look at it and come up with how much the cost is and what your weight is and do it in the same formula, that $1.98 would be substantially higher. It's actually better to go with the commercial landing rate as opposed to having an independent one. And to go lower, I don't know how you justify that.
That might even get us in trouble with somebody, the way the fairness is applied sometimes.
Fair and reasonable rates.
Yeah, fair and reasonable rates.
Which FAA requires, that's correct.
If I could make, one of the other things I noticed in your presentation was, if I got the numbers right, there was a 10% decline in GA operations and a 7% decline in fuel flowage. I think it will be very interesting 6 months from now, 3 months from now, when we have a self-serve, to see how much your fuel flowage goes up. Because at $1, $1.50, $2 and up a gallon difference here than any place else in the area, it pays to fly away from here to get gas. So even though you had a small decrease in actual flights, you had a significant decrease in fuel. That's because there were times it was $2.50 cheaper to fly over to San Ynez. And you can do that if you're filling up for a whole lot less. So when you get a reasonably priced self-serve fuel here, you may see your fuel flowage go up significantly. I'd also note that at some point in the future, as you pointed out, hopefully this end of the field will be more GA, there'll be more facilities, but you'll lose some revenue at the time. I would say I might be much more supportive of increased fees after that is done or when there's a real plan, rather than now, which, unless I'm mistaken, it's sort of a sometime in the future plan as opposed to, detailed and specific.
Just a clarification. The 10,000-pound number, we had a long discussion in the committee about that, and here's the reason. 12.5 is, that's a large airplane. You need a type certificate, big deal. That number came about because a lot of the charter is operated in Citations and King Airs that weigh under 12.5. That's where that number came from. That way you capture the people who are flying probably questionable charter. I mean, questionable as far as we're concerned, collecting money from them. There are very few 10,000-pound piston airplanes around. Very few. But there are a lot of King Airs that fall under it, a lot of Citations that fall under it. And that's why we came up with that number.
But again, the wording as it is today would be all aircraft used for commercial activity, regardless of the weight, is the way it's worded here. And I have to say, I think I'm not opposed to people paying their fair share. I think the real devil's in the details in implementing it as well. I think it was a great idea to have the FBOs taking over the administration of the transients, because pretty much you can't just slow down and throw somebody out the plane. You got to park. So that addresses that. I haven't heard a plan for how you would address the based commercial activity in collecting those fees. Would that be the airport administration? And so that would be...
Yes.
Go ahead.
In discussions with the FBOs, they know which tenant that they have who's doing commercial operations, and I'm sure at some point they would share that information with us so that we could contact them directly, get the fee, get the permit, and get in compliance with minimum standards and the city's ordinance on commercial activity or business purposes. The FBOs have indicated, quite frankly, that they would do that. Obviously, without the permit, as Karen pointed out, in talking with those who do pay the 3%, it will be still fair and reasonable for all operations on the field, and we wouldn't have to audit their business books. There have been times in the past where we did audit a charter operator, and he just actually picked up and left and went to Camarillo because he did not, even though they charge a landing fee, he didn't want the airport or the city to look at his personal finances. And I can appreciate that. But if that's the rule, that's the rule. This way, I think a landing fee is, I just think it is a more reasonable approach.
I agree.
I had another question. In the 10% that the FBOs collect, does that offset the current charges that they have for ramp fee or minimum fuel surcharge?
No.
When a transient comes to the field, they're going to get charged to either tie down their chains or fill up with the minimum amount of fuel. So this is on top of the fees that they're also going to accumulate as well. Am I understanding that
Yes.
right?
They're
Yeah, they're
collecting
gonna
it for
be-
us. Yeah.
Right. They would be reimbursed for collecting the fee for the airport, yes.
But in the example of a 20,000-pound airplane, they're going to make $3.
Correct.
Well, I believe where we are, my feeling is that the proposed policy statement needs a little more clarification to exclude flight schools,
Historic aircraft.
historic nonprofit organizations, and in the implementation, I guess it's in the implementation procedures. I guess it wasn't really clear how you were going to deal with the based commercial operations. I guess pretty much all of the based aircraft are through FBOs, or do you have any individual leases with hangars for non?
And the RT hangars specifically exclude commercial operations, so hopefully that's not going on, but it's
So it's
excluded.
really, the FBOs pretty much take
Right.
care of
Mhm.
the whole thing.
And we would follow our minimum standards, which set out very clearly the application process and the permitting process.
I guess before I would want to take action on this, I would like to see the proposed policy clarified a little bit more. That would be my motion, that it be returned to administration.
You could certainly amend the policy.
You could amend it now.
Amend it now?
With the correct exclusions to
Yeah.
those aircraft that we've been speaking about.
I can make a motion to either divide it so that we could vote on commercial separate from GA, but there's still some clarification in the wording that really should be ironed out before we take a vote on it.
Question of order, would this be appropriate to send back to the subcommittee to make a recommendation to the commission? Verify the wording in conjunction with administration, clarify the terminology and the amendments, and then put it back to the commission. I would like to suggest that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion to send this back to the subcommittee to refine and resubmit to the commission.
Second.
I'll second it. Okay.
All right.
Somebody second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. The proposal for general aviation landing fees is remanded back to subcommittee.
You've got some work to do.
And that brings us to item 11, proposed airline rates and charges, that the commission recommend maintaining airline rates and charges for October 2009 to September 30th, 2010, at the current rates of the airline terminal building square foot rate of $66.81 a square foot, and landing fees at $1.98 per 1,000 pounds of gross landed weight. That is no rate increases. And that was discussed at the lease subcommittee, and I think everyone heartily agreed that this was not a time to, certainly not a time to consider increasing rates. So that is the proposal. Any questions, discussion?
Move to approve.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The recommendation to adopt the proposed airline rates is approved. And I believe that takes us to the director's report.
Ooh, the most exciting part. Our passenger count for August was down 7.9%, with a total year-to-date of down 11.4%. And of course, we were expecting this. We did notice that John Wayne Airport, which for the past 2 years has had double-digit declines, this month, I think was the first month that they started having an increase. So, we're lagging behind them, but hopefully things will turn around in the at least coming year. Let's see. I think I probably talked about a whole lot of things already through the annual presentation. As I mentioned, the MAG Aviation has submitted their application to Community Development, the city's planning department, to start their review process. And I think that will go smoothly and go pretty well. We got the change in the zoning on the ramp. Got that corrected by the Coastal Commission. So I think we're good to go, and seems that MAG is, despite the economy, is still hanging in there. So we really all appreciate that. I think that's really the only things that I would point out. I think we've talked about, like I said, many things during the annual review, unless you have a question or something you want to discuss.
Any questions? All right. Well, thank you for that report.
I think John Wayne might have increased because they added service overseas to Australia. Didn't they do that?
They did.
Yeah, and I
So,
think
not a fair
Southwest
comparison.
may have added some service too,
JetBlue.
and JetBlue, so that probably
Apples
helped
and oranges.
a whole lot.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the adjournment. But before we go, since last month I brought us National Aviation Day, I thought I'd just give us this month's historic landmark on this day, 101 years ago, September 17th, 1908.
That would
Less
be
than
tomorrow.
September 17th? Oh, okay, maybe it's tomorrow. I don't know.
Close enough.
Sorry, we're almost done.
Tomorrow, that's right. Tomorrow. You can think about this tonight on your way home for tomorrow. Not even 5 years after the first successful powered flight, Orville Wright was demonstrating the Wright Flyer to the Army Signal Corps, hoping they would purchase it. In the front seat was a Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge. Fortunately, the propeller broke, the airplane crashed, and Lieutenant Selfridge became the first fatality of powered aircraft. Unfortunately, he was not wearing a helmet, and
It wasn't required at that
It
time.
wasn't required at that time, but more the Army did acquire the Wright Flyer, but more importantly, going forward, they required their pilots to wear helmets. So we should be thankful for and recognize all those who gave their lives to ensure that aviation is the safe industry that it has become.
I'm glad to see the predecessor to FAA is no different than the FAA is.
Are those now called Selfridge helmets?
I don't think so.
I think he was kind of lost in history there for a while until
Thanks for bringing him back.
brought
to
him
life.
right back up.
That's right.
Thank
So
you.
we should be
That's
thankful to all those who've made it as safe as it is today.
Thank you.
So, With that, we will adjourn. Thank you, everyone, and thank you all.